She polished glasses behind the bar, just another face in a small town. To most, she was nothing more than the woman who poured whiskey, offered a sympathetic nod, and let their complaints dissolve into the stale air. Her quiet smile and weary eyes blended into the scenery. Nobody looked twice. Nobody guessed what her silence concealed. Until the night the FBI stormed in, boots pounding, voices shouting, weapons raised. That night, Miller's Creek learned the bartender wasn't just serving drinks. She was the very person the feds had hunted for years. The town's deepest secret sat right there behind the mahogany counter, wearing an apron. Miller's Creek, population 4,947, had only one true gathering spot, the Copper Kettle. More than a bar, it doubled as confessional, clubhouse, and gossip exchange. Its wooden walls had soaked up 4 decades of stories and scandals. And at the center of it all stood Elena Vasquez. Most people didn't even bother with her name, they just called her the bartender. Every morning at 11 sharp, Elena unlocked the door. The brass bell rang, echoing through a room that smelled of last night's cigarettes and tomorrow's regrets. By 11:15, the coffee was brewing, glasses lined up, and her tools set in neat order. The regulars filtered in on cue. Old Pete with his arthritis complaints and bitter coffee. Mary Ellen with her gin and tonic, dissecting the marriages of everyone within earshot. By evening, the place swelled with farmers still dusted with soil, truckers full of highway tales, and factory men with oil-stained hands. To them, Elena wasn't remarkable. She was like a piece of sturdy furniture, always there, steady, unnoticed. She absorbed their problems, remembered their usual orders, and kept their confessions tucked safely away. She knew whose marriages were collapsing, who had switched to cheap liquor when money got tight, and which fights would break out before they even started. And when trouble did flare, she ended it fast, quicker than anyone expected from a woman her size. Few questioned where she'd learned to handle herself like that. Jake Morrison, the self-proclaimed philosopher of the hardware store, once told her after his 3rd beer, "You're wasted here. A smart woman like you could do anything. Why waste it on us?" Elena only gave him that small, detached smile and kept wiping down the bar. "Maybe I like the quiet," she said. But there was something about her that didn't fit. She never drank, not even to taste a new bottle. On breaks, she always sat facing the door, scanning the street with an alertness that seemed less habit and more survival. Her reflexes were uncanny. She once caught a falling bottle without even looking. And when a drunk got too bold, she ended it with a firm hand on a pressure point or a low voice with steel under the softness. She never bragged, never raised her voice, but those who saw her act walked away unsettled, as if they'd glimpsed the shadow of another life. Tommy Chin, a veteran who'd been to war, once watched her coolly disarm 3 aggressive loggers with nothing but calm words and subtle force. Later, he murmured into his beer, "You move like someone who's seen combat." Elena only paused for a moment before answering, "Everyone fights battles. Some just don't leave scars you can see." But Miller's Creek lived by an unspoken motto, "Mind your own business." People noticed these oddities about Elena, but they didn't connect the dots. She was steady, capable, discreet. That was enough. Sheriff Danny Martinez, 3rd-generation lawman, often stopped by in the afternoons. He liked to sip coffee at the bar, imagining his presence kept things orderly. "Quiet town," he'd remark, stirring sugar. "Nothing dangerous ever happens here. Worst you'll see is a drunk driver or a shouting match. Place like this, you'll never face real trouble." Elena would nod, wiping the counter, letting his words pass like background noise. He couldn't fathom that real danger sat across from him daily, hands steady, past hidden. Still, not everyone dismissed her entirely. In a town where family histories stretched back 3 generations, Elena's blank past made her a subject of curiosity. Betty Hawkins at the post office, self-proclaimed guardian of community secrets, appointed herself the chief investigator of Elena's mystery. But even Betty never guessed just how far the truth reached. "I think she's hiding from a nasty divorce," Betty Hawkins would declare to anyone willing to lend an ear. "You notice how she shuts down whenever family comes up? Gets stiff, like she's bracing herself. Mark my words, there's an ex-husband out there with a mean streak and a drinking habit. Others had their own theories. Maybe she was in witness protection, though no one could imagine what kind of crime from the outside world Miller's Creek could be sheltering her from. Some swore she had money tucked away from an inheritance and slung drinks only to avoid loneliness. A few insisted she was gathering material for a book, scribbling down every argument, heartbreak, and confession for a novel that would one day put their lives in print. Now and then the speculation got playful. Maybe she's a spy. Randy Phillips once joked after his fourth beer. Some undercover agent biding her time in our little backwater, waiting for the signal. The bar erupted with laughter, the kind that grows louder because the idea is so absurd. Elena, wiping a glass with her steady rhythm, had looked up just long enough to give Randy a faint, unreadable smile before returning to her task. That smile only fueled the laughter. It seemed too ridiculous to take seriously. But sometimes the mask slipped. Brief flashes. The way her gaze locked on international news reports with an intensity that didn't match idle curiosity. The way her eyes tracked unfamiliar faces in town, salesmen, travelers, passers-by, as if she were cataloging and cross-referencing them. And then there was the back office. Officially, it was for invoices, supplier contacts, and bar inventory. Nothing interesting. But tucked inside those stacks of papers were maps covered in markings and languages most locals couldn't even identify. Communications gear disguised as everyday electronics, humming on frequencies no civilian should have access to. In a drawer with identification cards, too many, too varied, each one with her face but a different name. On a Thursday night in late September, the Copper Kettle buzzed with its usual dozen or so patrons. The jukebox crooned Patsy Cline, glasses clinked softly, and Elena moved through the room with her habitual precision. At first, nothing seemed out of place until the soundtrack of Miller's Creek shifted. The town wasn't loud at 9:30 on a weeknight, but there was always something: the passing truck, the faint highway hum, a car pulling up to the diner. Tonight, that background noise vanished. A silence descended, one that didn't feel natural. It was the silence of planning, of timing, of something about to happen. Elena froze for only a second, registering it. Her customers, lost in their drinks and gossip, remained blissfully unaware. But Elena's senses sharpened. She knew the rhythm of coordinated movement, the stillness that came before impact. She had maybe half a minute before it arrived. The first confirmation came as car doors slammed shut in perfect unison outside. Heavy boots pounded pavement with the rhythm of training, not drunken chants. The windows trembled. Elena's body shifted subtly, centering itself. Her face didn't change, but every line of her posture said she was ready. She had been ready for years. The door exploded inward with a violent crash. Splinters sprang across the floor. Black-clad figures surged in, rifles raised, red laser sights cutting across the smoky bar light. Shouts filled the air. FBI? Everyone down. Now. Chaos erupted. Patrons screamed, chairs toppled, glass shattered against the floor. Old P dropped his coffee, fumbling to crouch behind the counter as though it could save him. Mary Ellen pressed into the wall, hands over her face, sobbing. But behind the bar, Elena didn't flinch. She didn't duck or run. Her expression stayed calm, her stance unshaken. No surprise, no panic. As if this moment, the one everyone else was terrified of, was the very one she'd been expecting. Instead of panicking, she set the glass she'd been polishing gently onto the counter, lifted her hands to shoulder height with steady, careful movements, and stood still, the picture of someone who had already played this moment out in her mind 100 times before. Target acquired. The lead agent barked into his radio, rifle leveled at her. Subject compliant and in custody. The word slammed into the bar's patrons like a physical blow. Target subject? This was Elena, the bartender who remembered their orders, listened without judgment, and kept their secrets safe. How could she possibly be the reason for a federal raid? While the locals stared in disbelief, more agents stormed into the Copper Kettle. They moved toward the back with single-minded efficiency, emerging minutes later with crates that clearly weren't bar stock, surveillance photos, coded files, strange electronics that belonged in a spy thriller rather than a Main Street pub. The lead agent stepped close, speaking clearly so the room would hear. Elena Vasquez, also known as Maria Santos. Catherine Wong. Jennifer Mitchell, he glanced down at his device before finishing, also known as Phantom. The name hung in a smoky air, shattering everything they thought they knew. Elena, the quiet bartender, wasn't just someone with a mysterious past. She was Phantom, a legend. The interrogation had dragged on for 18 hours. She said little, almost nothing, her silence more unnerving than any admission could have been. Agents cycled in and out of the commandeered sheriff's office, each trying different strategies: pressure, persuasion, threats, appeals. None of it cracked her calm. Outside Miller's Creek was electric with speculation. The bar stood wrapped in yellow tape, but townsfolk gathered anyway, craning for a glimpse, whispering theories. Betty Hawkins, never one to miss a stage, became the unofficial spokesperson. To a regional reporter, she declared, "We always knew she was different. She saw everything, remembered everything. We just didn't realize how much." Conveniently forgotten were her earlier guesses about ex-husbands and witness protection. The truth, when released in measured fragments, was wilder than any of their gossip. Elena Vasquez was an alias, one of many. Her real name was classified. For over a decade, she lived undercover in some of the most dangerous corners of the world, gathering intelligence on threats most civilians only read about years later. Phantom, her call sign, was earned by her uncanny ability to vanish in plain sight, to become whoever she needed to be. Miller's Creek, it turned out, had been her safe harbor. A place to lay low, decompress, and wait on standby. But safe harbors don't last forever. Enemy intercepts had exposed her location. The raid hadn't been an arrest, it was an extraction. Explaining that to a bewildered town proved nearly impossible. Sheriff Danny Martinez, red-faced under the press lights, admitted he'd had no idea. He had once assured her she'd never see trouble in his jurisdiction. Meanwhile, she had been quietly carrying a weight he couldn't even fathom. When the bar finally reopened weeks later, it wasn't the same. Some vowed to boycott it, angry at the years of deception. Others defended her, insisting she had been a better neighbor than most, no matter her true profession. The divide cut deeper than anyone expected, stirring conversations about trust, privacy, and what it means to belong. 3 days after the raid, she was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Just absence, sharp and undeniable. The agents vanished too, leaving Miller's Creek to wrestle with a hole she left behind. In the corner booth, though, something appeared, a whiskey shot, untouched, with a note scrawled in careful handwriting. "For Phantom. Thank you for keeping us safe." The quiet tributes spread. One by one, others left small tokens. Not everyone, but enough. A recognition that whatever her name, whatever her secrets, her service had mattered. Miller's Creek would never see itself the same way again. They learned that legends can hide behind ordinary smiles, that silence can shield unimaginable power, and that sometimes the person blending into the background carries the heaviest battles.